Welcome back into A to Z here on Locked On Atlanta. I am Mark Zinno. Thank you so much for joining me. Going to get to our good friend Brad Rowland coming up here in just a moment. This segment brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. So why endure all the often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions? With these big body shops, why wait behind the counter or wait for the person behind the counter, to sit there on the computer, clack away and choosing only the brand that they have in the warehouse that they happen to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Easiest thing to do, go to rockauto.com. You're going to save time and money. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership, like a Honda Odyssey fuel pump for $353 from a chain store, or that's $216 from Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourself customers like you for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for all of your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in the "How did you hear about us" box, so they know that we sent you. Again, Locked On in the "How did you hear about us" box at rockauto.com. Hawks have a huge game coming up, a win or go home situation in the play-in tournament as they take on the Charlotte Hornets tomorrow night, Wednesday night at State Farm Arena. And joining us now to break that game down from the Locked On Hawks podcast, it is Brad Rowland here on A to Z. Brad, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, sir. Big game, as you said, on Wednesday, so we're all fired up.
All right. Not the situation that the Hawks wanted to be in the play-in game, but when you talk about paths, and I said this yesterday on A to Z, like this is as favorable as a path as you could get for this team to host Charlotte, and then theoretically, as long as Brooklyn holds up their end of the deal by beating Cleveland, going to Cleveland to lock up that 8 seed.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you're drawing this up, as long as you assume the Hawks are in the 9-10 where they didn't want to be, once they're there, it doesn't get much easier on paper than home against Charlotte and then a road game against Cleveland, because if they have to go on the road against anyone, Cleveland's been a little bit shaky recently and the Hawks have not been great on the road. So obviously you have to win the first one first, but a home game versus Charlotte, and they're favored, as we'll talk about, I'm sure. So it's pretty nice setup for them overall.
Yes, we'll talk about the point spread. It's a thing of mine, Brad, as you know, for many years. That said, I mean, look, clearly these two teams are very similar. The Hawks are sixth in the NBA in scoring. Charlotte is second. They like to get out and score a ton of points. Hawks are second in three-point shooting. Charlotte is sixth. I mean, this whole thing sets up for a ton of points being scored. And I don't know if that necessarily favors the Hawks per se, but is it as simple to say it may come down to who makes more shots?
I think you're right. I mean, it does sound simple, but at the same time, these are two teams that are so high powered and they shoot threes very well, both top 5 or 6 in the league, 3-point shooting. And really, as you know, it's very cliche, but the make or miss league moniker applies here. I think if one team goes out and shoots, 18 for 35 from three, they're probably going to win. And that's not great if you're the Hawks, if you think you're the better team, especially if you're playing at home, because one game scenario, you have one bad night or the other team has one great night and you're going home. But I think, like you said, these teams are both kind of bad on defense, good on offense. And if one team just shoots the lights out, then they have a huge advantage.
Yeah, and I wonder, playoff Trey. It's hard for me to envision the Hawks losing this game at home with Trey Young, given kind of what he did last year in the playoffs. And I think you saw a little bit of playoff Trey over the course of the last 2 weeks of the regular season, knowing that the Hawks had to stockpile some wins and start to put themselves in position where they could at least have somewhat of a favorable draw in this play-in tournament. But, I mean, is it all on Trey Young to do everything with John Collins out? What can be expected from the complementary players on this team?
I think that the Hornets are going to do their best to not let Trey beat them. And whether that works or not, we'll see. But I was actually watching some of the games back from earlier this year and even last year, is that Charlotte's going to try their best to double Trey and blitz Trey and make somebody else beat them. And Trey will figure it out. He always does. It might take him a quarter, it might take him a quarter and a half, whatever it's going to be, but he'll figure out a way to attack. It's just that in the meantime, somebody else has got to make shots, especially if they're going to double. Trey has been willing to pass. Obviously, his assist numbers are through the roof, but somebody has to make shots. And you said it, without Collins, whether it's Bogdanovich or Herter or DeAndre Hunter, someone's got to make threes and be able to attack as well. Especially if they're doubling Trey, someone's going to have to be able to gather, put it on the floor, and create opportunities for the bigs, all of that stuff. And that's where you get in a little bit shakier territory because everybody trusts Trey. Obviously, Trey is fantastic. The one downside is that if he has a bad night, you're obviously in deep trouble because they're so reliant on him. But I think that if one or two guys make shots that are not Trey Young, you're perfectly fine because at the end of the day, like you said, Trey's going to do enough on his own. He's just going to have a little bit of help.
I don't want to look too far down the road here, but this is the systemic problem I've noticed with the Hawks offense since John Collins goes out. Look, when they're playing a bad defensive team like Charlotte, I don't think it shows up, right? And what I don't think shows up is the fact that, Trey doesn't have to have the 35, 40-point night, and his box scores are pretty consistent, right? Like when Trey has big nights, he's at the free throw line at least 10 times. And if he's not shooting above 45% where he's making shots on the routine, he's getting to the free throw line and he's dishing out a lot of assists and he can sort of supplement his game that way. The problem is when the Hawks play good defenses, and they'll play a good defense in Cleveland, at least statistically, although I think they're fading down the stretch from a defensive standpoint. But let's, again, not looking too far ahead at Miami in the first round. The problem is with a team like Miami that's very good defensively, when there's nobody else to draw the defense away from Trey, it becomes almost, I don't want to say ISO ball, a hero ball, but it's just like they can focus on locking down Trey and say, go ahead, everybody else. I dare you to beat us. We're good enough and deep enough defensively that you guys will have okay nights, but you're not going to beat us. And without John Collins, there isn't another reliable, consistent scorer in this offense.
Certainly, that's one of the questions about this team, short term and long term. If you're trying to go into the lab and figure out what this team needs, it might sound crazy to say they need more offense because they're number 2 in the league in efficiency and all those numbers. But when it does bog down, they could certainly use some help for Trey Young. And Charlotte, like you said, not a great defensive team, but they've actually done a pretty good job on Trey specifically in the last couple of years because they're willing to kind of just make everybody else beat them. And teams are going to do that. Now, they've had a lot of reps against it. Nate's talked about it. They've kind of encountered every possible defense now against Trey Young. But at the same time, you have to have somebody do it. And down the stretch, the one positive has been Bogdanovich has been very good for the last, 2 months or so. And if he is that guy, he is the one guy on the roster that can go get his own shot on the perimeter. I guess probably at will if he's got it going. Now, if he doesn't have it going, then they don't really have the other guy because Herter's a supporting piece. Hunter's a supporting piece. Bogdanovich is the one guy who's kind of wired to go ahead and just go out and take it and take his own shots and distribute. And he's the number 2 by default, but I'm kind of with you. Like long term, ideally you'd have another guy that's a little bit more on that high end of the hierarchy.
Does coaching matter in a game like this, in a situation like this? And that's not to slight Nate per se, but I mean, Trey doesn't have to look back at the bench to see if it's okay to chuck up a 3 from the logo, right? Like that's not his game. Trey can do this all on his own, and I don't know that it necessarily matters what the rotation is or who's on the floor against whom. So, how much will coaching play into this?
I think it matters some. I'm kind of with you that Trey's going to do what Trey does.
Right.
So offensively, like drawing stuff up doesn't really happen that much in the playoffs. Maybe coming out of timeouts, you get advantages on stuff that you're drawing up right there on a napkin in the huddle, that kind of thing. And I think also with 3 days in between games, it can matter a little bit more because you might be able to actually throw some different wrinkles at a team that you haven't been able to during the regular season. You know this, but there's no game planning for the most part. There might be little things, but there's not enough time to do that. But with 3 full days and a matchup that you are familiar with against Charlotte, maybe there is some tweaks you can put in. And I think, on Charlotte's side, dealing with Trey, on the Hawks side, maybe trying to get back on defense. Because if there's one thing that I'm worried about in this game, it's defense in transition because the Hawks are not good at that. And Charlotte will run it down your throat. And maybe that's something that Nate can kind of just beat into their heads. But I think it can be overrated for sure. Rotation stuff and stuff that we can see on the outside can be overrated. It matters. But at the end of the day, players got to make plays and make shots.
Yeah, and you mentioned in transition, the total for this game opened at 240.5, which is a monster
Oof.
number. It's been bet down to 236 when I checked last night, which is kind of surprising again because that's got to be a ton of sharp money. Like, I would have jumped on the under at 240. I'd probably still play the under at 236. And by my calculations, my math, somebody has to get to 125 in this game. And there's a sense for me. And I'm curious to see how this plays out, not only from the betting standpoint, but just in general sort of game flow, because both these offenses can score and will score. It's almost like they cancel each other out. I think in a 1-game scenario, i.e., like a game 7, They're maybe a little bit more sort of patient. They're maybe a little bit more meticulous in shot selection. They might not rush things to sort of, get to a certain number or score at a certain pace. You just have to make the shots that you take count. So I think this might be not as high scoring as many people would envision.
I tend to lean your way on these one game scenarios in general. I like it usually gets a little bit sluggish at some point, whether it's early on with jitters or late when things slow down. And if there's one thing that will tell you that the Hawks can maybe keep Charlotte out of transition, it's that the Hawks don't turn the ball over at all. Like Charlotte relies on turnover creation, and the Hawks are quite literally number one in the league in avoiding turnovers. So if they can do that in this game, it might cover up their bad defense in transition. Because if you look at the roster, not to go down the whole rabbit hole, but with Gallo and Trey and all these guys, they have bad transition defenders, and that hurts them sometimes. So if you're looking for a disaster scenario, it's turnovers from the Hawks that lead to easy stuff from the Hornets. But I'm kind of with you. I'd be leaning under as well. It might not be popular because these are two teams that are really good on offense, that play athletic, but I'm kind of surprised, like you are, that the total went down, because usually people like to bet the over. That's
Yeah.
usually what happens.
I would tell you wait until there's some buyback on the over before
It'll
you
happen.
place the wager.
Yeah.
I think it will, especially with another 24 hours before the game gets underway. All right, final thoughts, because I know that you're into the betting stuff as much as I am here. 4.5, the number. There's over 70% of the public already on the Atlanta Hawks. As I said earlier, I don't see a scenario where Trey Young allows his team to lose this game. Like, I'm playing out in my head, if they lose, what does he have to answer for? What does Trey Young have to answer for? And it's probably something he's not ready to answer for, because in reality, he's only had playoff success, all things considered, right? Like, his only playoff run was a very impressive playoff run, and playoff Trey was great. And, it gets real quiet in here. Remember that, Brad? It gets real quiet. The noise will go up real quick for him if they lose this game. So I have a hard time envisioning them doing it. But in the same respect, when so much of the public just jumps right on one side, I can't willfully back the Hawks and lay the 4 points. So for me, it's Hornets or pass, getting 4.5, and hopefully the Hawks just win by 3.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. It's always scary to me when everyone's on one side, and I like to go the other side if that's the case.
Yeah.
I think the Hawks are going to win the game. I will pick them to win the game. Whether they win it by 5+ is another thing entirely. Because for me, you have the best clutch player on the floor. You have the best player on the floor in Trey. But if you're the Hawks, you like to, maybe not like to, but you tend to play close games because your defense gives it back and you have these lulls. And I think that it should surprise no one if this game is very, very, very close with 3 minutes to go. I think the Hawks are the better team, but even at home, they haven't always had breezy wins against good teams. Now, they've blown out some bad teams recently, but against good teams, and Charlotte's pretty good. They're not incredible by any means, but this is a game in which I'll be surprised if the Hornets don't make a run or two. Like, they're just too high powered on offense. And I'd be pretty afraid to lay 4.5 points. So I think at the end of the day, I'd probably pass, to be honest. But I do think the Hawks are the better team, and that they're going to hold serve at home, because it'd just be hard for me to see that Trey would lose this game. But at the same time, if he doesn't have it, they might be in trouble. So it's a lot of pressure on him. Obviously, he's the guy you want pressure on. He's your best player. He's your superstar. But if he has a bad game, the Hawks might be in trouble. So it comes down to more than that. But it could just be, if Trey's awesome, then the Hawks win. And if he's not, maybe they don't.
Yeah, and this is why I appreciate you, Brad. You certainly know how to break down and handicap a game. It's never, away from my heart as far as handicapping and sports betting is concerned. Brad Rowland from Locked On Hawks podcast. Appreciate the time as always, brother. You stay well, and hopefully we're doing this again, getting ready for Cleveland.
I'll be here if you need me. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, brother. All right. Coming up next, we will wrap things up here on this Tuesday edition of A to Z right here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Stay with me. That's coming up next.